This is Conversations on Careers and Professional Life, a podcast from the Foster School of Business, MBA Career Management Office. I'm your host, Gregory Heller. On each episode, I talk with guests from faculty and staff to students, alumni, and business leaders about the skills and strategies that can help you design a professional career that you're happy with. My guest today is Ted Jordan. Ted is a graduate of the UW Foster Undergrad Business Program, and he spent 24 years at Microsoft, where he learned enduring lessons about building relationships. He shares those lessons with students at Foster in the undergraduate mentor program and the Husky Sales Certificate program as a guest lecturer. His talk, From Outsider to Ally, reframes how we think about networking. Ted and I talk about the power of a good subject line or connect message, the importance of curiosity, the gift of attention, the importance of follow-up, and so much more. Ted has some great advice to share in this conversation on careers and professional life. Ted Jordan, welcome to Conversations on Careers and Professional Life.
Gregory, I'm thrilled to be here. You and I have stayed close over the last few years, and wow, it's come to this, so thank you.
Yeah. And we'll get to, I think the topic of our conversation will actually can somewhat be illustrated by the way we started connecting. But before we get there, why don't you tell us just a little bit about your background and what you've been doing recently?
Well, I think the place to start is I was a graduate from the UW Business School. I had a concentration in accounting. I never did a lick of accounting professionally, but my pursuit of trying to get a job as a CPA accountant ultimately led me to Microsoft in a very indirect way. And the biggest learning I had when I started at Microsoft my first year was so difficult, so hard. I was 6 months in and I said, I'm going to quit. I did not sign up for this because it was hard because of the volume, the complexity, and the deadlines. It was relentless. And if I decided to quit and then I realized, oh, I can't do that. I got to come up with another idea. That's where my greatest learning came from is I'm going to be here. How am I going to get through this? And I realized the way I'm going to learn, my manager didn't expect me to just sit in my office and divinely figure out how to do it. I realized all the answers I needed were in the minds of the people around me. So I had to figure out who are the experts. I had to find them. And then secondly, how do I get that expert to meet with me? And that was the most powerful thing I learned is how do you get them to meet with you? And how can you get them to keep meeting with you? Because there was no way I was going to learn everything in a 15-minute call. And that was the magic. And that's kind of what I teach the students in the sales certificate classes. How do you do that? How do you find experts? How do you approach them so they'll want to eagerly speak to you?
All right. So your career at Microsoft was long. You
Yes,
started there around the turn of the millennium, I
that's right.
think, right?
April of 2000.
Okay. So you saw a lot of change, different eras of
Oh
Microsoft.
my God, yeah.
Yeah. And in order to gain those insights, you're saying you unlocked the power of the people around you. You tapped their brains to learn the things you needed to learn. Tell me a little bit about your strategy around making those reach outs and getting people to like pick up the phone or meet you down for a cup of coffee and answer your questions.
I'll tackle the first part is how do you
Mm-hmm.
get someone to meet with you? And this was, I use this strategy routinely. If I said, hey, Gregory, I'm looking for someone who's an expert in POSA, like point of sale activation, which was one of the changes that Microsoft had years ago, and I had to learn it. So I said, Gregory, do you know anyone who's an expert in POSA? And you would give me a name, and I'd reach out to Phil, and I would he was a guy who worked at Microsoft. I had access to his calendar, and I just put a meeting on his calendar. And the title of the meeting was, "May I borrow your wisdom and creativity?"
A little flattery never hurt.
It is, you're teeing it up for me, sure, Gregory. That is what Dale Carnegie's one of his principles. It's my personal favorite. Is give the other person a fine reputation to live up to. And not only that, but most emails that people get are, "Hey, Ted, please send me those milestones, or please send me the due dates for that thing." So if you got an email that said, "May I borrow your wisdom and creativity?" they're going to open it because
Mm-hmm.
it's so out of the ordinary. Then what I would do in the body of the mail, I would say, "Hey, Phil, I was speaking with Gregory. He said you're the undisputed authority on POSA. I feel confident that I can learn from you. Are you willing to give me 15 minutes of your wisdom?" Again, it just underscored, I think this guy's an authority. Gave him a high, as Dale Carnegie said, I gave him a reputation to live up to. And I don't think anyone has ever said no when I've done that. And
So 20 plus years later, you've distilled all this wisdom and you share it with undergrads at Foster
yes,
in the Husky Sales Certificate Program and through your work in the mentorship program here for Foster undergrads.
yes.
What are the top three things that you think students are grappling with and the way around networking and the way that you teach and advise them to tackle those challenges?
I always look at it this way. If I'm trying to meet someone, uh, here's again, I still remember a quote from a football coach from 1991, and he was a national championship football coach. And I remember how I saw this, but he said, and he would say to his players or to anyone, he would say, "I know you will not care about me until you know that I care about you." You got to start there. And how do you show that you care for somebody? You give them something. What can you give someone that will make them want to respond? And what I gave, for example, those people or the experts is, I'm recognizing that you're an expert and I want to learn from you. And I think so often most people don't realize that a common thing I hear is they would say, "Ted, I keep meeting with this person, but what am I giving them? I just feel like I'm taking and taking. What am I giving the other person?" And what I've learned through that process is that my time, my energy, my curiosity, those all are currencies. And I leverage that. And I also discovered that one thing I learned during that process is that experts love to show off. So rarely do we get the attention or someone's audience, an audience who wants to hear what we know and our knowledge. And the other person, all I say to students is, you just have to go in with an eager curiosity, and that's it. Ask them questions, be curious about them, and they will be overwhelmed that you're paying attention to them. And
Yeah.
that's the strategy that I have always used.
Curiosity is so important. I think sometimes students maybe in some ways over prepare. They have like a list of questions and the interaction starts to feel more like an interrogation than a conversation, right?
Yeah.
And like you're moving on, like oh, blah, 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 blah. I just said something and then move on to the next thing rather than really listening, absorbing, and letting that curiosity potentially direct where the conversation goes. So that's one thing that I want to underscore from what you said. The other is this idea of what are you giving people? And I think that, Wayne Baker and Adam Grant, Wayne Baker wrote the book, All You Have to Do Is Ask, Adam Grant, Give and Take. They talk about this idea that people like to feel useful. People like to feel like they're helping you. So giving, and they feel good when they help someone. So giving somebody a chance to help you is actually a generous act that allows them to feel good about having provided something that's useful. But I think there's a key here, and I would love to get your take on this. The student or the job seeker, the person who's reaching out, has to do something very important and very specific after the conversation so that the person they met with knows that it was helpful, right? So we always tell people you have to follow up, and you have to follow up promptly, and you have to follow up not generically like, oh, thank you so much for your time, but you have to reference something that you learned that you found helpful, maybe a recommendation that was made during that conversation. Someone said, hey, read this book or check out this podcast. And then you do, and then you have to follow up later. And it actually gives you an opportunity for another touch point, right?
Yeah.
Where you can say, oh, that was really helpful, and here's why. So do you have any advice on the follow through and the follow up after the actual conversation?
Yes. The best, whenever I've mentored students, it's when, and I tell students to do this, but often they don't do it. And because it's hard, this is they're just not used to doing this. But some students were quite clever. And I would tell students that story about, may I borrow your wisdom and creativity? The next day, I remember a student, that's what he put in the title of his mail to me. And it was so satisfying. It's like, oh, someone was listening.
Imitation is the highest form of flattery, right?
And I go, oh, hallelujah. This student knows he understood what I was saying, and now he's putting into action. And then the other thing to also state is if the person you're meeting with gives you just a nugget of wisdom or just something so good, or better if it's like an action item, you say, hey, Gregory, I took your advice and I contacted somebody. I reached out to somebody. That's gold in itself that you said, hey, I took your advice. Wow, someone's actually thinking it's valuable. And then you follow up and say, when this person replies to me, I'll let you know. I'll give you an update. That's an opportunity for another touch point.
Yeah.
When you follow up, whether the person that they reached out to gets back to them or not, doesn't matter. You've set it up so you can now, or I will have a chance to reconnect with you in one way or another.
Yeah, those multiple touch points are critical to establishing a relationship. So, if you've been given a recommendation, follow through on that recommendation, then follow up after you've followed through. If something about your life status, studies, job has changed, that's another opportunity to drop a note and say, hey, just want to let you know what happened. If you see a news article or an event that you think relates in some way to the thing that you were talking about, it's another great opportunity to just say, hey, I saw this, made me think of our conversation. All those touch points are how relationships are built over time.
Yeah. And, it's the thing I think is challenging is that those days when I was at Microsoft looking for an expert, you could argue I was trying to get something from them. And I was trying to get, but it was a softer sell because I was treating them like the expert that they were. And I was kind of going back to your questions about, sure, I went in with a list of questions that I would have, but then I would ask the first question and they would go somewhere. I go, oh, I hadn't even thought about that. And then you forget about your list. If they say something of interest or you keep zeroing in and fine tuning your questions, that's where the gold is. And that's where the experts rarely get those kind of questions. People love, I've discovered, taking tests, so to speak, where I said, hey, ask me all the questions you want. And it feels great to know that, wow, I do have those answers. It's another point why experts love to talk about what they're experts on. So just keep, I would say
preparation of coming up with a bunch of questions, that's important, but you don't have to be married to those questions throughout the conversation.
Not at all.
I think another thing that you identified here is that you knew why you were reaching out to each of those people. Like, you had an agenda. You knew specifically why that was the person that you wanted talk with. And I think this is where sometimes a student or a job seeker maybe gets a little confused in the process, right? They think, well, I need to meet someone at that target company. And they just like look for anyone in their network, 1, 2 degrees, and they reach out without taking the time to think, okay, what can I get from this particular person? Like, what can they give me in terms of information, insights that's like unique to them? Do you ever help students figure out sort of that targeting approach so that they are actually reaching out to the right person, not just any warm body at a company?
Uh, I'll answer it this way: is that's kind of like the outreach. How do you create that mail or phone call that is so irresistible to the person who gets it? Like I use the example, may I borrow your wisdom
Yeah.
and creativity? It's irresistible. Someone's going to respond to that. But in case that doesn't work, if I know I'm going to be meeting with someone or I'm trying to connect with someone I don't know, I'm going to pour over their LinkedIn and look for something that excites me or interests me. There's a lot of stuff on there that would have no interest whatsoever. But if I'm going to reach out again to someone, let's say who's an expert on POSA, just going back to that, I wouldn't say, I need expertise on POSA and Formula One. Again, and I've looked through their profile and it says that they'll say something, they'll have a post that I went to the Formula One uh, race in Miami. I go, oh, and I like Formula One, and people want to talk about things that really interest them, things they care about, and if you kind of tease that in the title or the subject line, it's going to give them a reason to go, oh, okay, this person did their homework. They went a little bit further and they looked at my LinkedIn. So often, being at Microsoft, people are always trying to sell. Salespeople, I was getting probably 5 email a week from just random salespeople trying to get my attention. The only time I ever even read it was if it was clear that salesperson read my LinkedIn. And I go, yep, I'm going to give this person a shot because they went the extra mile. So make it irresistible. Look for the things that the other person is going to care about.
Yeah, and do that prep work, do the research, right?
Yeah.
It's easier than ever today to do that research on the people who you're targeting to meet with. LinkedIn is obviously gold, but also sometimes, maybe they've been on a podcast, maybe they've spoken at a conference and you can see the conference session recording that they did. Maybe they've given some other type of talk that's on YouTube. So, spend a little bit of time to do that research so that you can show that you actually, put the time in, why you're talking to this person and what that interaction, how it can benefit you and perhaps how it can benefit them.
Yeah. I mean, you're clearly going to speak to them because they're experts, but hey, they're people too, and they
Yeah.
have their own interests. And if you can tap into that as well, you're in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think this maybe is now a time to say like how we got connected. I think that you reached out to me on LinkedIn. I think it might have been about my podcast. You wanted to understand the podcasting process. And I was like, hey, I have something to say here. I can share something with this guy, Ted, who's a UW Foster alum. And hey, he's working at Microsoft. Maybe this could be an interesting relationship. And we took the time, we had a call, shared what I knew about podcasting, and we've stayed in touch ever since.
Yeah, that was it. I don't remember when it was. It had to be at least a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
and I think maybe we would have a connection point once every 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was even once a year. But when I was on LinkedIn, if you posted something that caught my attention, I would reply to it, and that's what people. I'll say this. Another thing I'll say. Right now, so many people, especially if you're a millennial or a Gen Zer, we're craving likes and followers. And I think so many people right now are lonely.
Mm-hmm.
So many people are craving connection. So if I tell students, turn it around, instead of waving your hands and trying to get people to see you, find and look at somebody else.
Yeah.
And you are, and then indirectly, you're going to get those likes and a follower, in so to speak, because you took the time to get to know them. They, as I always like to say, when I have conversations with people and I really connect with them in this way, I know when I leave that conversation, they're not thinking to themselves, wow, that guy Ted, he's really interesting. No, they're thinking, I'm really interesting.
Right.
And indirectly, they're going to value me and what I did for them. And I just think so many people go through life, we are invisible, or at the very least, we're overlooked. So if you can tap into someone and recognize that it's less about what they do for a living. People want to be recognized for who they are. And if you can find out a little bit about who they are, it can be way far more potent than just what they do for a living.
Yeah. I know one thing that I think could be a very powerful strategy, even before you reach out to that person on LinkedIn, is to stalk them on LinkedIn and comment on posts that they've made. You know, if they make an interesting post, don't say like, "Oh, that's really great." Like actually engage with that post and give a comment with your own insights. And they're like, "Oh, hey, that person actually just really thought about my post and they said it was really helpful and they called out the one thing that was really helpful." Then when you reach out to them with a message or a connect request, you're not some rando faceless person, right? They recognize, oh, that person commented on some of my posts already, and the act of commenting shows them that what they wrote was helpful. It helps amplify that. Perhaps you shared it with your network, and they'll be more likely to respond to the message in their inbox.
Yeah, in fact, I would take it a step further. I'm not sure if maybe you did say this, but if let's say someone did have a unique post and you genuinely liked it, I would say take it out of, you don't just say a like and put a comment next to the post. Go directly to their DM.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it underscores you're going just that extra step of saying, I want to take it out of the social media thing, and now I'm talking right to you. And because you don't need other people reading it, I always felt like I'm not trying to impress anyone else reading it. I just want your attention. So
Mm-hmm.
if you can, take it out of, go right to the DM so they feel like it's very personal. And again, and even if the quote, let's say you don't even you thought, oh man, that article wasn't very good at all. But if you found just one element of that post that was interesting, do that. That's all you need to do. And it's solid gold. I do that routinely.
Yeah. So I want to shift gears a little bit. We're talking about networking, and we've been talking about it sort of in the context of like how a student, maybe is going to network to build relationships within a target company so that they learn about that company or that role and then maybe have a better chance of getting an offer. We've been talking about it, I think, in that context. But uh, within a few weeks of this podcast coming out, students will be starting their internships probably, and they'll have 8 to 10 weeks to build relationships within their company where they're interning, and hopefully get a return offer,
Yeah.
but establish and build their network. And it sounds like in your experience, way back in the year 2000, you were in that situation of being new at a company and beginning to establish yourself. So other than reaching out, if you think about your time at Microsoft and all the people who probably reached out to you and all the new hires that you saw come in and, you know, get their feet under them and start being productive and getting networked in, like what are some lessons and some advice that you would share with students who are either starting an internship or starting that first job after graduating, either undergrad or with their masters, to establish themselves in such like a large organization such as Microsoft?
Uh, yeah, in fact, it was, I think one of your recent, I commented on one of your uh, recent podcasts where you talked about, um, and one person I could not agree more is you don't have to really look very hard for networking opportunities or who to make connections with. Just go deep with the people you're directly working with. Start there. It's
Mm-hmm.
easy because you already have to have a conversation with them. Why not take that time to learn a little bit more about not only what they do, but a little bit about them? Because again, so often we're just getting strip mined for our knowledge and not who we are. So I always took those opportunities. First of all, if you can, go into their office, walk to their office, drive to their office. It's so flattering to people when as the recipient of that, now this person went out of their way and took their valuable time to come meet with me. That says I'm worth their time.
Mm-hmm.
So do that whenever possible. Go meet them face to face. And then there's an opportunity when you're right there to look around their office and find out what interests them. What do they value? And I would always start a conversation there. Uh, and no matter what it is, if it's anything unique out of the ordinary, I would zero in on it. If they got where they went to college or they've got something unique on their desk. So that's the first thing. Um, the other thing that I found, and I think this uh, answers your question, is what really helped me in that first year is if I found someone who was that expert and completely helped me, what I learned from that is, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to send their manager an unsolicited message, and I'll put it in the form of a SAR. I'm sure you're familiar with this. It's like very much a interview tactic.
Mm-hmm.
I say, hey, I just spoke with Gregory. Here's what he did for me. Here was the problem. I was trying to learn about POSA. What was the action and the result and the impact? And I would just lay it out like that for their manager. Managers rarely get those unsolicited positive feedback on the people on their team. This cannot fail because they just don't get that kind of feedback, and it's like they will take that email, put it in the file and say, I'm going to bring that up come review time so everyone knows what Ted did and how Gregory helped him. So that's a win. Again, the person that I met with wins, the manager wins, and I win. So I think I'm not sure if that answered your
Yeah,
question or
no,
not.
that's a great piece of advice, right? And it's sort of one step beyond telling the person you were really helpful. It's telling a person that's really important to that person, their manager, that this person was really helpful in unlocking, information for me that helped me be successful and what it did for the company. It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be a long message either. It's a pretty quick message.
Oh yeah. Don't make it. It's just it's bullets. It says here was the situation. This was the action that I took or Gregory took, and here was the result. And right, and everyone comes out looking great in that
Yeah.
scenario.
The follow through, I just underscored again, the follow through is so important. The follow through and the follow up. Um, because I know that I feel like there's nothing worse than someone asks you for something, some information or to do something or a recommendation, and you give it to them and then you hear nothing. You're like, what, did the email even get through? Did they see it? Like, what happened there? And just that message back that says, this is exactly what I needed. It's helped me do X, Y, and Z. It takes a couple moments, not even minutes, and it makes all the difference. That person is going to be much more likely to help you again in the future.
Totally. And that was my strategy all along because I just knew if I had a 15 or 30-minute meeting with this expert on POSA, I just knew there's no way I'm going to learn it all in one call.
Yeah.
So if I make it easier for that person to say, "Yeah, Ted, I'll give you another 30 minutes," hallelujah. And that's one way to do it is saying, "Hey, I heard you."
So I think we alluded to maybe how some things have changed a little bit more recently. Maybe it's sort of post-pandemic, like there's a little bit more isolation. People are maybe a little bit more lonely. They might be working from a home office more often than not. And even when they go into the office, maybe their colleagues aren't around, right? So the work environment has changed a little bit. But as we record this in March of 2026, we're also seeing things change in the tech industry at large with right sizing or downsizing, restructuring, whatever we're going to call it, whatever euphemism is going to be in the headlines today. You've probably been through a couple waves of this in your career. Do you have any advice for the job seeker in an environment like this where there's uncertainty at a lot of companies? Maybe people are now working with half the team size that they had a year ago. Uh, Anything that you would advise around having empathy and understanding when you're doing this kind of outreach and networking in a industry or specific company that has experienced restructuring or layoffs or downsizing?
Gregory, I'll answer it this way. When I was at Microsoft, I never had a real vision of where I was going, and that was okay. Microsoft had no problem. They valued people who were looking to expand, move to different teams, but they also really valued people who stayed in the same organization because they needed that expertise
Mm-hmm.
year over year. So, uh, so I didn't know where I was going, but I still had opportunities for advancement because that old saying, business as usual, there is nothing usual about business, certainly in tech where everything's moving so fast and changing. To me, there was always an opportunity to become an expert at something. Something has just come up. The team I was on, we needed an expert to learn. Oh my God, this is coming down. This is coming down from the product groups. We've got to figure out how to implement this. And the organization wanted people to pick up that challenge and become an expert. And not only did I have something new to learn and it was challenging, but I was seen as more valuable. Oh, we can't get rid of that guy. He's the expert in XYZ. So you don't have to have this enormous ambition, try to move around. There's plenty of opportunities right where you're at. And I'm not certain if that answered your question
Yeah.
or not.
Well, I think you call out something that's really important. We see a lot of people move jobs a lot. The job hopping. Now maybe there's more job hugging going on. That's a term that I've seen in the news recently. But I think about how long it took for me to really understand the job that I was doing in all the different jobs I've done. Um, and it wasn't like a year and I was, firing on all cylinders. It might have been 2 or 3 years. You start to accumulate knowledge and experience. You become maybe a subject matter expert in something, and then you are so much more valuable. And for people who maybe haven't ever had that experience, haven't been in one job long enough to even recognize how you change, from 6 months to 12 months to 18 months to 24 months,
Yeah.
you know, it can be a revelatory experience when you realize, like, I really have some expertise here.
Oh, I use this analogy is that after a year at Microsoft, I felt like, well, when I got there, it was like learning. I'm not joking. It was like learning a foreign language. It
Hmm.
is. It is it's a different language. The terms that people use, how different organizations do things that you work with. You got to learn not only your organization, you got to learn all the stakeholder
Yeah.
organizations too to understand what am I giving them and will it work and what do I need from them. So I remember when I got to the year, I felt great. I felt like I had just learned the language and I was fluent, but I was only fluent in the present tense.
Right.
I didn't know, okay, how do you form the future tense? How do you form the future subjunctive? How do you do past tense? So it took me probably 3 years where I felt like, man, and where uh, uh, other people saw me as the expert, and people would come to me looking for my expertise because I had been there for 3 years. Meanwhile, anyone else had already left, and they didn't have that chance to go as deep as I did. And
Yeah.
I'll tell you, that was satisfying to know that I was this valuable. As hard as it was valuable when I got there. I said, "Oh, wow, look at me."
Yeah. So maybe it is a little bit of advice to uh, think about how you become more valuable to the organization, how you become better at your job by staying longer and being less inclined to be, looking at the other side of the fence and being like, oh, well, maybe I should move over there. Like, stick around a little while, become indispensable. It's like Cal Newport says, so good they can't ignore you, right? As we wrap up, I'd love to hear, if there's any other advice that you have, given the market that we're in right now, what's happening with AI, advice that you would have for job seekers and people who are currently working, based upon the cycles that you've seen in the past and what you're seeing now.
Well, that's a tough one because I'm just thinking about AI seems to be where, if you're not in AI, having recently been in sales where the company I was working for, we were a provider or a vendor supplier to Microsoft. And if you're not in the field of AI, cloud, or data centers, Microsoft isn't spending money.
Right.
So if you're in there, hallelujah. But they still need people to do the work. In fact, I was referencing how once I became an expert in a particular area, you will become indispensable
Hmm.
as long as the organization needs that thing. Uh,
So develop some subject matter expertise.
yep, we touched on that already. The other thing is that the more people you stay connected with, and if you tell them you're looking for a job, they are going to be your new salespeople. That's what I've discovered is that if I tell someone, "Hey, I got riffed, I got laid off," and I say I'm looking, they're now going to be your best salespeople. So I always say, stay in touch with. Don't let those leads go cold,
Hmm.
even if it's just once a year.
Yeah.
It can bear fruit for certain. In fact, that's how I ultimately got my job at Microsoft by reaching out to a guy I hadn't spoke with when in 2 years. Set up lunch with him. 3 days later, he says he sent me a 3-word email. Want a job?
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
was just because I I said, "Hey, let's go out to lunch."
Yeah, I think that's a great lesson. I think especially now, with the way that AI has lowered the cost of job application, right? I mean, I have students who have told me they've applied to hundreds of internships. I've read articles, where people have applied to thousands of jobs. On the other end of that, the company can't, they're getting thousands of applications for that one role. They can't get through all of that. The way that you're going to rise to the top of that pile is by knowing someone perhaps on that team, by having someone who can vouch for you. And I think at even smaller companies, they're maybe even foregoing the whole uh, job posting process. They're looking at their network directly and they're only going to source from people who are 1 or 2 degrees outside of their network. So building that network for yourself, building those relationships, building credibility within those relationships uh, is absolutely valuable in this market where the job application process is just saturated by AI generated resumes and applications and cover letters. Your relationships are going to be the best source of opportunity. I know that in my life, I think I have applied to 5 jobs ever. And I think that every other role that I've gotten has been based upon my network, my reputation. And I think that only one of my jobs was like a cold apply job.
Wow, good for you. Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah. So
And,
that's,
oh,
I think it's a strong lesson, might not work for everyone, but I hear it from our MBAs, when they're 3, 5, 7 years out, they say every job I've gotten since the first job out of the MBA has come through either my MBA network, the Foster network of people, or it's come through a network that I established in that first job.
and I'll say one more thing, because it can be a little demoralizing, or just it seems impossible to, if there's a company you want to work for and you just don't know anyone. There's no first, second, or even third degree, and you said, "Hey," by responding to maybe a post of someone who works there, you'd say, "Oh my God, this is going to take forever." But you got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And by posting saying, "I really liked what you wrote on that last post, Gregory," put it in a DM. Hopefully they'll respond. And then you just keep that going. But there are no shortcuts
Yeah.
unless you know somebody.
Yeah, it's 2 long journeys, right? It's either the one where you're building the relationships and the connections, and that takes time, or it's the one where you're applying, and that takes time too. So I think that when you're out there, you're making connections, you can actually feel the progress more than when you're doing online applications, dropping resumes.
Yeah. And take every win you can. Sure, the ultimate win is to get an interview or get the job. But hey, if someone just replies to a message, that's a win.
Yeah.
And keep those in mind, because it'll keep your sanity for sure.
All right. Well, Ted, I want to thank you so much for having this conversation on careers and professional life with me.
Gregory, anytime. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
This was such a great conversation, and I'm sure that Ted and I could have talked about so much more. But here are 3 lessons that really stood out to me. The first is make the ask irresistible. I love Ted's subject line, "May I borrow your wisdom and creativity?" I think I'm going to borrow that line. It signals something most outreach doesn't. I see you as an expert. I want to learn from you specifically. Figure out how to communicate that, and your response rate will certainly change. Second, curiosity is the skill. As I've said before, interested is interesting. Certainly, prepare questions, but don't be married to them. Follow the thread of the conversation, ask follow-ups, go deeper. Make sure the other person feels seen, heard, and remembered, which brings me to the third. Follow through and follow up. It's the differentiator. When someone gives you advice or a referral, act on it and then report back. That loop is how a single conversation becomes a relationship. And relationships are what move the needle in a market flooded with AI-generated applications and emails. You can learn more about Ted at tedjordantalks.com or on LinkedIn. I'll put links to both in the show notes. Thank you for listening to Conversations on Careers and Professional Life. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or classmate. Help others find the show by leaving a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Did you know that you can find Conversations on Careers and Professional Life on YouTube or Spotify? One thing you can do to help others find the show is by subscribing and rating on those platforms. Conversations on Careers and Professional Life is produced by me, Gregory Heller, with support from the Foster School of Business, Office of MBA Career Management. Learn more about the show, find show notes and past episodes, and get in touch with me at conversationsoncareers.com.